You close your eyes one night in your own bed, in your own life, in the year 2026, and when you open them again, something is wrong. The ceiling above you isn't yours. It's wooden beams and thatch instead of paint and plaster. The air smells like smoke, mud, and something sour underneath it you can't quite place. Outside, you hear cartwheels on dirt, not engines. No phone buzzing on the nightstand, because there is no nightstand and there is no phone. Somehow, impossibly, you've woken up in the year 1347.
Before you can even process that thought, you hear it. Coughing from the house next door, then crying, then silence. The kind that feels heavier than noise ever could. You don't know it yet, but you've just woken up in the middle of the deadliest event in recorded human history. Not a war, not a famine, although there was one of those too. A disease so fast and so merciless that entire towns went silent in a matter of weeks. If you actually had to survive this, here's what you'd be walking into. In the early 1300s, Europe was already fragile. Decades of unusually cold, wet weather had ruined harvests again and again. A period historians now call the Great Famine. People were malnourished, weakened, and packed into crowded medieval cities with no understanding of germs, sanitation, or how disease actually spread. Streets doubled as sewers. Rats were everywhere. Nobody thought twice about it because nobody had any reason to. Then, in 1347, ships arrived at the port of Messina in Sicily. Most of the sailors aboard were already dead. The ones who weren't were dying, covered in dark, swollen lumps the size of eggs in their armpits, their necks, their groins. Within days, the disease spread into the city. Within a year, it had reached most of Europe. This was the Black Death, almost certainly caused by a bacterium called Yersinia pestis, carried by fleas living on black rats, which traveled on virtually every trade ship crossing the Mediterranean. Nobody alive at the time had any concept of bacteria. To them, this looked like nothing less than the end of the world, arriving overnight. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you: the speed. Someone could wake up feeling completely fine, develop a fever and the telltale swollen lymph nodes called buboes by midday, and be dead within 48 hours. There was no real treatment. Physicians at the time, working with no knowledge of bacteria or antibiotics, tried bloodletting, vinegar baths, and burning aromatic herbs to cleanse the air, none of which did anything except waste the little time the sick had left.
Now, you don't have to imagine living through this. You're already here. You step outside your borrowed home. Someone in the house next door has a fever. By the time the sun sets, they're covered in the swelling. You don't have a phone to call for help. You don't have a hospital that understands what's happening. And you don't have any real way of knowing if you're already infected too. All you can do is wait and watch. In cities like Florence, contemporary accounts described corpses piled in the streets faster than anyone could bury them. Mass graves were dug, sometimes holding hundreds of bodies at once, because there simply weren't enough living people left to give the dead a proper burial. The Italian writer Giovanni Boccaccio, who lived through the outbreak in Florence, described how the disease devastated the city so badly that brothers abandoned brothers and parents abandoned their own children simply out of pure terror of catching it themselves. Read that again. Parents leaving their children, not out of cruelty, but because the fear of an invisible, unstoppable death was strong enough to override one of the most powerful instincts a human being has. And the social collapse wasn't just emotional, it was total. Trade stopped, farming stopped, because there weren't enough living farmers left to work the fields. Entire villages were abandoned completely, left standing empty, because every single resident had either died or fled. Some historians estimate the plague killed somewhere between a third and half of Europe's entire population in just a few years. Try to picture that. Not a third of one city, a third of an entire continent, gone in roughly the time it takes a child to finish elementary school. So if you actually had to live out a full life here, your odds genuinely wouldn't be good. Even setting the plague itself aside, average life expectancy at the time hovered somewhere in the low 30s, dragged down by high infant mortality, frequent childbirth deaths, regular famines, and diseases we can now treat with a single course of antibiotics. You'd likely lose multiple siblings before adulthood. You'd watch your own parents age and die decades earlier than parents do today. And then, on top of all of that, you'd have to survive the single deadliest disease outbreak in recorded history, arriving with essentially zero warning. But here's the strange twist hiding inside all of this devastation. The people who survived didn't just endure it. In some unexpected ways, they came out the other side with more leverage than they'd ever had before. With so much of the population gone, labor suddenly became scarce. Peasants who had been tied to the land under brutal feudal obligations could now demand wages or simply walk away and find work elsewhere because landowners desperately needed anyone willing to work. Historians widely credit the Black Death as one of the forces that helped break down the rigid feudal system across Europe, indirectly setting the stage for enormous social and economic shifts in the centuries that followed. In other words, the worst catastrophe in human history accidentally cracked open a door toward a more mobile, more negotiable kind of society, not because anyone planned it, simply because catastrophe forces change, whether the people living through it intended it or not. So would you have survived? Honestly, the odds were against you. Roughly 1 in 3 to 1 in 2 people around you wouldn't make it. And if you somehow lived, it wouldn't be because you were strong, clever, or careful. In a disease with no known cure and no understood cause, survival had almost nothing to do with merit. It was, in the most literal sense, luck. That's the part that's almost impossible to sit with from where we stand now. We live in a world with antibiotics, with sanitation systems, with the ability to identify a new disease within days instead of guessing for years. None of that existed in 1347. People didn't fail to stop the Black Death because they were foolish. They failed because they were facing something they had absolutely no tools to understand, fight, or even see. So you close your eyes again in that borrowed wooden room, in that borrowed terrifying year. And when you open them, you're back. Your own ceiling, your own bed, your own phone, lighting up on the nightstand like nothing ever happened. Nothing did happen. Not to you, not really. But it happened to someone, millions of someones, who never got a chance to wake up and find their way back. So the next time something minor goes wrong in your day, a delayed flight, a slow internet connection, a long line at the pharmacy, it might be worth remembering this. Somewhere around 1347, surviving the day itself was the only goal anyone had, and most people, through no fault of their own, didn't get to.